So tell us, what's behind the latest Russian threats against the Jewish agency? We know about the war with Ukraine, but what is motivating Russia to do this at this time?
Look, the pressure on Jewish agency goes already for a number of years. In fact, for the last 8 years, since Russia started its war against Ukraine, when they occupied Crimea, and the nations of the free world worsened, they introduced a number of new instructions and demands to all the organizations, not only to Jewish agencies, but to all the organizations connected to abroad. And they were demanding that they stop collecting information about citizens of Russia and transferring it to the West. But of course, for Jewish agencies, it's a ridiculous demand because that's exactly what Jewish agency is doing. So they were warning it a number of times, but no doubt that this time they decided to turn it into the case, go to the court and demand the closure of Jewish agency. That's the way of pressure on Israel. Russia faces today full isolation from the free world, and they're looking for the ways to press on different countries to weaken this pressure. They are threatening with nuclear war. They are threatening that Europe will die from cold and winter. And to Israel, they found something specific that they're pressing on the Jewish agency. But what I am insisting and saying that, in fact, it's interest of Russia no less than ours. The Jewish agency will continue working. For us, the interest is obvious. But for Russia, it's one of the very few international organizations which still works in Moscow. And if Putin was telling me 20 years ago that he sees Jewish organizations and Jewish community as a bridge to the free world, today it's one of the few left bridges. So we should not be blackmailed. We should remember it's our mutual interest. Of course, we have to negotiate all the juridical aspects, but in no way to permit Russia to blackmail us and to change our support of Ukrainian resistance.
Wow. So, if this is this bridge, if the Jewish people and the Jewish agency are this bridge to the Western world, to Israel, why would Russia want to be burning it right now?
Well, as I said, it wants to find the weak points. What is really important to Israel, what they can press us, blackmail us. And yet, know how important it is for us connection and support of Jewish community. And the question of Aliyah, of course, is at the top of our agenda. So, they decide to do it. It's one department which wants to is responsible for finding ways to press Israel. Another department which is responsible to keep some bridges with the West. And that's how it happens. And the growing isolation of Russia in the world makes them more desperate in their attempts.
Wow. So what kind of an impact would this have on the Jewish people that still live in Russia and even those in Ukraine? I saw online that there are somewhere around 1 million either Jewish people or people with one or Jewish parent or one Jewish grandparent still living in Russia. What kind of an impact would that have on them?
Look, there are approximately 600,000 Jews eligible under the law of return to get Israeli citizenship. And there is approximately 200,000 such people in Ukraine. And of course, our connection with Jewish communities in Ukraine and Russia are very important. And Jewish Agency has a huge, huge operation. I was involved for 9 years that I was the chairman of Jewish Agency, and I visited, of course, many places in Russia and Ukraine. It's really a very impressive operation, not only in terms of Aliyah, but also summer camps, Israeli experience programs when you're bringing the Jews for 10 days or for 3 months or for 1 year programs. and many others. And of course, it will be unfortunate if some of these problems will be stopped. But on the other hand, we have to remember that Israel knew how to keep contact and support Soviet Jews in my years, the Soviet Union, even when there was no representatives of Jewish agency or there was no Israeli embassy. So we should not be desperate. At the same time, I'm warning all our friends in Russia and Ukraine that those who are seriously thinking about Aliyah should better do it as quickly as possible, because situation is worsening very quickly in Russia. By the way, the result of there is, of course, the big wave of refugees from Ukraine, and there are approximately 15,000 Jews who made Aliyah, who came to Israel since it started, and probably there will be 15 or 20,000 who will become Israeli citizens. At this moment already, there are more than 20,000 Jews who made Aliyah from Russia, and there are another 20,000 in pipeline. My estimation is that approximately 3 times more Jews will come from Russia than from Ukraine. And the reason is that while in Ukraine, of course, it's disaster, the houses are destroyed, station of war, but at least people are fighting for the freedom and dignity, and they have hope. In Russia, what's happening, situation is, it becomes more and more closed society in terms of freedom of speech and freedom of connection, contacting some foreign organizations. It's all punishment for anything you say publicly, which authorities disagree, is already as bad as it was in my times. Wow. When I was sentenced for high treason, exactly in what Jewish agency is accused now. The only freedom which is still left is freedom of immigration. And who knows how long it will exist. That's why Jews who are concerned that they are finding themselves discovering in fierce society, in closed society, they're in a hurry to leave.
So then would you say that there are, then most of the Jews that are left in the Soviet Union don't necessarily want to come out, or they do want to come?
Well,
I spoke with somebody today and he said his parents are in Moscow and they don't want to come. And I thought, why not? But
well, that's the history of Jewish people. There are people, even in Iran, there are like 20,000 Jews who are not in a hurry to come. So from 3 million Jews who were in the former Soviet Union, 2 million already left. And as I said, now between Russia and Ukraine, there are like 100,000. Russian and Ukrainian Jews were making half of all Aliyah to Israel in the last few years. Like 7,000 were coming in a year from Russia and 6,000 from Ukraine, but was half of Alim who were coming from all over the world. In 3 months, it grew from 7,000 a year to 20,000 in 4 months. So it's a huge growth. We know this station very well. People, when they're well established, when they have profession, when they speak this language, many of them are not in a hurry to leave, even in much worse situation. So from my point, of course, they should leave as quickly as possible. But let's be realistic. Even in the worst situation, there will be a few hundred thousands who will still prefer to live in Russia and to wait until the last moment. I think as a result of what's happened between Russia and Ukraine, approximately 100,000 Jews will come from Russia, but still means that there will be about 500,000 who will remain there. What will happen in the years to come, we will see.
Wow. So do you see overall the situation in with Russia right now? Do you see it improving or just going downhill?
You mean
Just the war and everything. Do you see any way out of this whole thing?
I think while Putin said that Ukraine is not a nation just before the war and there are places in Russia, I think he made more than anybody else to make Ukrainians feel as a proud nation, which is fighting for their freedom. And that's why I believe that if the West will continue with their support in terms of weapons and with their sanctions against Russia, so in half a year, if it will continue at least for half a year from now, the situation can look very different. I think Ukraine will liberate most of its territories, and Russia will have to find the way out of it. In the meantime, the isolation of Russia is only growing, and I hope that some interest, like Israel has definitely interest in keeping contact, communication with Jewish community. Germany has interest to get some oil and gas in order to heat their houses in the winter. So everybody has some interest. I hope it will not undermine the world's effort to help Ukraine, because it's not only what Russia is doing now, it's not only a threat to Ukraine, it's threat to the stability of the free world, and in fact attempt to rebuild Russian empire and to change type of relations and guarantees which free world created.
So do you see, I mean, we have a very mixed society here in Israel. This one man I spoke with today, like I said, his parents are in Moscow, but his wife's parents are in Odessa. Do you see any friction in Israeli society because of those differences, or are people pretty much standing together?
You have to understand, overwhelming majority of Russian Jews is as much against this war as, of course, all the Ukrainian Jews. So, in fact, that's why it's such a strange war, because I was born and grew in Donetsk in Ukraine, and then there is the center of war now. And then I studied in Moscow. And so even those days of my childhood, and by the way, there was a lot of Soviet anti-Semitism there. But if somebody would have said to me, make a guess, the next war in this city will be or between Russians and Ukrainians, or between the inhabitants of Earth and the inhabitants of other planets. Without any hesitation, I would say between the inhabitants of different planets, because there was no way to imagine that Russians and Ukrainians who live so closely, all the families are mixed. Some people live for some years here in Moscow, then in Odessa, or vice versa. It was impossible to imagine that's what will happen. And that, of course, the result of the fact that there is a Russian leader who decided that his mission is to rebuild Russian empire. Mm-hmm. And I think that overwhelmingly, in general, public opinion in Israel, but definitely of those who came here from the former Soviet Union, whether they came from Russia or Ukraine or Belarus, they are overwhelmingly against this Russian aggression.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's an Israeli delegation that's leaving tonight, I think, for Moscow for talks. What should they tell President Putin or whoever they talk to? What should their message be?
I think it is very important that they'll stick to the questions of Jewish agency and what are the violations that Russians see and what can be done in order we will continue our work in accordance with Russian law. But I also believe they have to remind how to speak to Russia, understanding that's our mutual interest. That of course we are interested of Jewish agency and continuing to keep our contact with Russian Jewry, but they also should be interested to have one of the last international organizations which still stays in Russia. And that's why we don't feel ourselves in some kind of inferiority position. And definitely we should not, I hope we will not permit them to take these discussions into the question of our supporting or not supporting the aggression to Ukraine.
Do you think that Russia has the chutzpah to basically turn its back regarding Syria to like attack Israel in Syria instead of letting Israel deal with Iran there?
Well, I don't think that even if Russia wanted, it cannot afford now another war, especially when most of their elite units, which were in Syria, now were moved to Ukraine. And when I put the information about the generals and colonels who are appointed there, instead of those who were killed, they all are coming from their wars in Syria. So now another important thing is for us to remember that, of course, it's very unfortunate that the West in 2014 or whatever, 13, the West and President Obama demonstrated such a big weakness in Syria, undermining their own promise to fight Syria if it uses chemical weapons, that Russia understood that they're weak, and then they made two things. They brought their troops to Syria and built their air base, which in fact gives them control over the skies, a military base, which gives them control over the skies of Syria. And they went to Crimea and started their war with Ukraine. They both came at the same moment from the belief of Russia that now the free world is so weak that it will not resist. And they were right to some extent. As a result of this, the skies of Syria are controlled by Russia, and we had no choice but to come to strategic understanding with Russia that when Iran is creating their bases in Syria to attack us, we will be destroying them and Russia will not interfere. We have to understand that the strategic understanding was reached not because Putin loves Jews so much. And, well, Putin has a very positive attitude personally to Jews, that's true. But he has interests as a superpower, and their interests were not that they want to be a ruling power in Syria. They don't want to shed or even to give, or definitely they don't want to give the Iran control over Syria. So that was the understanding. Now today, again, when Russia is in such an isolation, they have very few allies. Iran and Syria and North Korea, that's more or less all what they have. So yes, maybe in this situation they will have to review and to think again how to demonstrate their good attitude to Iran, how to reciprocate Iran and Syria for their support of their aggression. I don't think, again, that we should be scared, that we should be weak, that we should be frightened. We should remind again to Russia that that's also their interest. But in case, if Russia will really decide to give more effective anti-craft weapons to Syria, we should remember our own past when we were successfully fighting against Syria and Egypt, when the best, by far the best Soviet weapon was coming to them. And China was fully supporting their struggle against Israel. So we should not be frightened, we should not be blackmailed. We should negotiate with Russia the points of our mutual interest.